Hello again, I'm Bridget Behe with Michigan State University, and this is the second of 5 videos discussing research on how to attract new customers to local garden centers. In this video, I'm going to share the first 2 key findings we learned from our consumer consultants, starting with the positive and negative reactions to gardening. Then I'll discuss how they view people who garden.
As we seek to develop some marketing strategies to better connect Gen X and Gen Y to plants, we'll first thank the industry sponsors who made this work possible. American Hort, USDA, and the Ohio Department of Agriculture generously funded this research. The research and marketing team was comprised of Carol Miller, editor of Meister Media Worldwide, Susan Hogan of Actionable Results and Research and adjunct professor of marketing at Emory University, Lynn Swidinowski, founder and president, Creative Business Consulting Group, and me, Bridget Behe, professor in the Department of Horticulture at Michigan State University. The steps in our investigation were to look at the published literature, gather consumer insight, identify key findings, create marketing campaigns, recruit industry partners to implement those campaigns, and monitor progress and success. In this segment, we'll talk about gathering consumer insight and we'll identify 2 of the key findings. We worked with our consumer consultants who were located in Ohio in October of 2013 and collected some information from them about their activities and actions with plants and gardening. One of the first key findings we wanted to summarize was their attitudes about gardening. The good news is that more than half, or approximately 56%, of the respondents enjoyed gardening. We also saw that they were very positive in their perceptions of what they could do with plants, but now we wanted to see how we could get them to shop at the local garden center and shop a little bit more often. Notice that we only had a couple of individuals, 2 of them, who said that they hated it. So the news really was largely good. What were some of the reasons that they had a positive attitude about gardening? Well, primarily what we heard from them was their love of nature, wanting to be outdoors, being in tune with nature, getting fresh air and sunshine. We also heard a calming theme where gardening or interacting with plants helped to relieve stress. It gave them some time to relax. It helped them be a little bit more easygoing and therapeutic to a certain extent. Some of them found it was a little bit of hard work. You had to be disciplined and motivated to do some of the harder things with gardening. But they also cited that patience and having a beautiful yard, getting some bounty from the garden, being more in tune with nature and organic living were also some of the other positives that they were interested in. Gardening was a chance for them to relax. Many of them also enjoyed the solitary nature of gardening. It was a bit of an escape. One consumer consultant took her coffee each Saturday morning at 10:30 and worked her way through the garden. She said this was a wonderful way to start her weekend, and she really enjoyed that time interacting with plants in the garden. What's fun about gardening? Eating produce was a very common answer. Jen W. told us that making great dishes with the food that she grew was a lot of fun for her. The creative aspect of designing a garden, of picking the plants out while shopping, making the yard beautiful, all helped to contribute to the fun of gardening. Some others enjoyed, and we could classify this as fun, seeing those efforts pay off. To a certain extent, living off the land or being self-sufficient was fun for them. They could also improve their property value and then spend a little bit of time with their family. Speaking of family, we heard this as a very common theme, that gardening stirs many family memories. We found that most of our consumer consultants mentioned childhood memories, many of them pleasant, when they worked with parents or grandparents in the garden. Often the person mentioned was a mother or a grandmother. What was interesting was older consumer consultants reminisced about this time with very specific activities or plant memories. These seem to create very powerful association, strong bonds, and very powerful family ties. It was interesting that gardening and the generations really seemed to resonate as a theme with the families. One of our consumer consultants said, "I would enjoy it more if my sons realized how much they will miss our interaction in gardening, and so they would appreciate it more. My parents won't be around much longer, and it hits me. The time gardening, raking leaves, turning soil, fiddling in the flower beds, you remember what your grandparent houses looked like at different times and different seasons." So it was interesting to us to hear how much parents and grandparents wanted their children to be active in the garden, and how much children seem to remember that time they spent with their parents and grandparents. Gardening offers family time with kids. Most of the moms who gave us consumer feedback wanted to garden with their children. However, there was a sweet spot between age 5 and age 13. Under age 5, it was difficult to hold the youngsters' attention, and over age 13, they seemed to be distracted with other things. Moms mentioned family time and teachable moments most often. Having fun was another reason to invite kids to play in the dirt, help pick out plants. It was kind of funny, but several of our consumer consultants said that they enjoyed getting free labor as a reason to involve their kids. What were some of the negatives? Well, for a majority, very few had negatives, but we did hear gardening was time-consuming. Many of them were too busy to garden. It's dirty. You get dirt under your fingernails. And others thought about the hard work, and it was a big commitment. Expense showed up slightly lower on the list, but when you think about it, there are some things that the industry could do to address some of these negatives, particularly the time commitment. What was the dark side of gardening? Certainly, most often we heard people are busy, they just didn't have that much time. They get dirty, it is a lot of hard work, and some of the consumers gave us feedback that the gardeners were perceived as being reclusive. There was also the weeding, the insects, the diseases, and the unwanted animals, and sadly, having to deal with poor weather. Even when they did everything right, the weather didn't always cooperate. Some said it took a lot of space, and others felt it was too expensive. We also heard quite often, "I don't know what I'm doing, and it makes me feel ignorant." The second key finding was, what was a typical gardener? Some see the gardener as a white-haired woman with a floppy hat and knee pads. Jennifer O., one of our consumer consultants, said, "In my mind, a typical gardener is a beautiful silver-haired woman. She dresses fun and comfortable. She is a true artist of her own domain, her yard. She gets up before the sun, enjoys her morning coffee, and gears up with her gloves and tools to begin her day in her yard, her paradise." But many of our consumer consultants couldn't relate to this. When we asked them if they saw themselves as a typical gardener, 62% of them said absolutely not. We had a smaller percentage who didn't know what a typical gardener was, or didn't really want to describe one, and some of them said maybe. But I think this shows us that many, particularly of the Gen X and Gen Y, really don't see themselves meeting the term gardener or fitting that term gardener. So I think we need to do something about that particular word. Maybe use another word, one that they can relate to a bit better. Gardening does serve multiple needs for folks. Ray, one of our Gen Xers, said, "I think a typical gardener is the person who lives in the suburbs and has a garden for both pleasure and raising vegetables. I don't think that income level dictates who does their own gardening. I have friends who barely make ends meet, but yet do not attempt to grow their own flowers or vegetables. I have others who live very comfortably and still insist on growing vegetables themselves. and he knows of an equal number of men and women who enjoy gardening. So we do see a diversity of opinion, and some folks have a positive opinion of that term gardening. However, Max M in the Gen Y group said, more of a mindset than a physical attribute. The gardener takes commitment and a strong will, as well as an adventurous side to try new things. So a gardener could have any lifestyle, although gardening definitely helps. It definitely helps you to have a yard, even if it's a small one. So that old lady image was not universal or complete. So overall, we saw good and bad perceptions of what a gardener was. The positives included somebody who was patient, nurturing, caring, hardworking, maybe even a visionary, somebody who enjoyed social activities with family and friends, somebody who likes to entertain and share. Some of the negatives were that the gardener might be an older person or somebody who might be considered a hippie or a hipster, maybe even reclusive. We also heard gardening is dirty and pretty time-consuming. We also heard some attitudes that it could go either positive or negative, that gardening contributes to a relaxed lifestyle, but can only be done by somebody with time on their hands. Lastly, the gardener might be somebody who is very perfectionist, who cares about appearances, and that might be the only reason that they enjoy working with plants.
Stay around for our next video segment. I'll summarize the 2 remaining findings from our consumer consultants.